What's up guys, Kellen Morgan back here with Inside Out Precision, and today I've got a gear review, but it's a little different than the normal bow reviews. Today I'm reviewing the Stan Xtinction 2. So this is a new index style release that was just released. We actually bought this back at the ATA show and we just got them in today. And it's one of my favorite releases that I've used in a while here. To get into some of the technical features of it, they have a new technology called the sear and a half technology. And you may, if you're not familiar with what the sear is the mechanism that connects the trigger to the jaw when it opens. On a standard single sear release, as when you hook it up to your string and you pull back, it puts more pressure on the trigger mechanism. So what happens is that even if I set my trigger fairly light, once there's pressure against that mechanism, it actually takes more pressure to get that trigger to fire. So let's say at rest, a single sear release takes half a pound. Once I get two full draw and I've got pressure against that mechanism, it may take 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds. What this technology has done is it leverages that weight that you have against the sear, and basically it eliminates the weight stacking on the sear mechanism. So there's other releases out there that have a double sear, where the trigger sear is separate from the hook and jaw sear, and they work really well, but they do get pretty bulky. Which, when I say bulky, it's not like it's this giant contraption, but it is a little bit bigger. And sometimes, when you get into your anchor point, you can feel that release pushing up against your face a little bit, which can cause issues in torque in the back end of the arrow. So what this sear and a half has done is basically taken that same feel of not stacking any weight on the trigger, but put it in a smaller package. So I'll kind of zoom in on this for you a little bit here. What I really like about this release are a couple things. I really like the shape and the width of the trigger. It's not a big bulky trigger. It fits really, really nicely right into that crease in my knuckle right there. The other thing is the hook faces away from you, which a lot of releases the hook faces towards you. And as a guy with a beard, I can tell you that I have had beard hairs get caught up in that hook mechanism, and when my follow through happens, I pull out a little chunk of beard. Has nothing to do with the performance of the release, but it is a nice feature that the hook faces away from your face. On top of that, this is the solid neck. I can adjust the length of this. So there's a little set screw right here. If I loosen that set screw, I can unscrew basically the shank of this and lengthen it out. It's got a full 1.25 inches of adjustment in length, or I can suck it all the way down. Now, I like a really short release because I like to, when I come into my anchor point, I like to really be able to hook my finger around that trigger so I'm pulling straight back instead of having my finger straight and kind of flicking down on it. So for me, having a release that I can get really short is really nice. They do make this with a nylon strap that you can get even shorter than this, like really, really short, all the way up against this. Shooting this earlier, I did notice that compared to my B3 Hawk, my hand does sit a little further back on my face. I don't have quite as solid of an anchor as I'd like, so I'd probably end up shortening my loop a little bit to do that. I don't want to mess with my draw length, but to get that hand tighter, I would just shorten my loop up a little bit, and I think it would be fine. I really like the distance between where the hook is and the trigger is. It's not too far forward, but it's not really recessed back in the release. It's just a very comfortable release, in my opinion. So shooting this a little bit, what I've noticed is I really like I have an independent adjustment for my trigger tension as well as my trigger travel. So this little screw right beneath the trigger right here, try and focus in on that little set screw right there. What I did to set that was I turned it clockwise until it wouldn't hold a load. Like I could just pull on this and it would open. So what I did was I started to back it out about 1/4 turn at a time until it finally started holding enough weight to where I knew it wasn't going to release. At that point, there is no travel in that trigger before it releases, which to me is really, really important. I hate it when I can feel that trigger start to move, because all of a sudden this little switch goes off in your brain like the shot's about to go, and you usually end up just punching the trigger and making kind of a poor shot. So for me, a trigger that has no movement in it is essential for good shot execution. On top of that, I can adjust the tension of the trigger with this little screw right on top here. that little guy right there, I can use that screw to adjust how many pounds of pressure it takes to actually get the trigger to release and fire the shot. Now, personally, I wouldn't say I like a stiff trigger, but I don't want a trigger where I'm gonna be worried that when I hook my finger on there, it's gonna go off. I wanna be able to come in, make contact with that release, put a little tension on it, and then start my hard aim. And then as I'm aiming, I just think about just basically hugging that trigger with my finger and it will fire. So once you have your travel set, you can kind of play around with the tension of the trigger until you find something that works really well for your shooting style. With this particular one, when I lock down the set screw, there is no swivel on this, which is fine, but because of that, you do need to make sure that you shoot a fairly relaxed hand. You know, if I'm grabbing the shank of that release, which is true with any release, even if it has a swivel, if I'm hanging on to it, it's gonna torque the back end of that arrow a little bit. But you can actually, you know, rotate this a little bit one way or the other. You know, some people have their hand turned a little bit more into their face than others. And so you can rotate that release so that that trigger just aligns perfectly with the crease in your knuckle. That's not necessarily a new technology. It's been around in a lot of releases, but it's a nice feature to have. The strap is really comfortable. You know, it's pretty standard leather strap with like a felt backing here. If I was to shoot this one, I would probably cut this one off and put a BOA strap on it. I just really like the BOA. They're comfortable, they last a long time, they don't stretch out on you. Even if they do stretch out, you just give it a couple more clicks and you're good to go. So I played around with this a little bit today and it shot really, really tight groups for me. Even with my anchor feeling, you know, about 1/8 of an inch further back than it usually is, this release performed really well. And they're not lying when they say that it doesn't stack any weight on that trigger when you're at full draw. It felt pretty much the exact same as it did when it was just sitting in my hand like this. So if you're looking for a new index release, I highly recommend checking one of these out. Again, this is the Stand Xtinction 2. They do have the nylon strap, which is great. The only downside to a nylon strap that I can think of, and it has nothing to do with accuracy or performance, but when you're hiking around and you're hunting, this part of the release just kind of flops around, which can get kind of annoying. You know, it never fails that the one time you need to be quiet, you pick up your bow and your release clanks against your riser and, you know, alerts an animal to your presence. But I've actually seen guys with releases like that where they actually just hot glued a magnet onto their strap right here and they just flip it back and stick it to the magnet. It's easy to get off and it won't be flopping all around when you're walking around. So that's an option if you like the nylon strap. This one does fold back out of the way, which is nice. There's a lot of releases that don't do that, and probably the biggest nemesis of the functionality of your release is tree sap or pitch. I once climbed up into a tree stand. I don't hunt out of tree stands hardly ever, but when I was like 15, I climbed up in a tree stand. Getting up there, you know, I was just using branches. We had a few steps, but I was mostly just using branches to climb up there, real safe. And I got a bunch of pitch all over my release, and I tried just kind of wiping it off, but it actually got down in the spring there. And thankfully a deer didn't come by that day because I didn't have to shoot at one. But when I went to practice the next day, I got back and I hit the trigger and it literally, like, nothing happened. The release just was frozen, and then as soon as I took it away from my face, the pressure opened up the jaws and it fired. So being able to flip that back out of the way if you are getting in a tree stand and not have this rubbing up against the tree getting pitch in it is a really nice feature. So I highly recommend you go check this release out. It's pretty much right on par with all of the other high-end releases in terms of price point. I think we're selling this for $149.99. If you do want to buy one of these, you can go to thebowrack.com, or the best way to get a hold of us is to call us at 541-746-9711 and just ask one of us about this release, and we'll get your info and get you one coming. So if you have any questions or comments about this, please feel free to comment below. I think I explained it pretty well, but I'm sure there's something that I missed. So like I said, feel free to comment below. I'll get back to you as best I can. We're getting a lot of comments these days, which is great. I love it. Thank you guys. But you know, sometimes I spend an hour and a half going through trying to answer all these, and inevitably somebody falls through the cracks. So if I don't get back to you on YouTube, hit me up on Instagram. Just say, hey, I hit you up on YouTube. I didn't hear a response. You know, it's been a few days. and proceed with your question. And I see those, you know, they come in chronological order, and I usually can get through them a little faster. So thanks for watching, guys. As usual, remember, precision is a decision. Keep them in the middle, and I'll see you on the range.